Eleanor Grayson sat at the head of her dining table, the one she'd polished every Sunday for 40 years. The mahogany gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow, reflecting the flicker of candles she'd lit an hour ago. A three-tiered cake, frosted in her favorite lavender shade, sat untouched in the center, its sugary roses wilting under the weight of silence. The clock on the mantel ticked past 7 p.m. Each second a small betrayal. Her children Lila, Mark, and Sophie weren't coming. She'd spent weeks planning this night. Her 70th birthday wasn't just a milestone. It was a chance to gather her family, to mend the frayed threads of their bond. She'd sent invitations embossed with gold foil, called each of them to confirm, even baked Mark's favorite lemon tarts. But as the hours slipped by, her phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, no hurried apologies. Just the hum of an empty house and the ache in her chest. Eleanor smoothed the lace tablecloth, her fingers tracing the patterns she'd inherited from her mother. She'd raised her children alone after their father, Tom, left when Sophie was barely 5. She'd worked 2 jobs, mornings at the library, evenings at the diner to keep them fed, clothed, and dreaming. Lila had gone to art school, Mark to medical school, and Sophie, the youngest, had chased her passion for music. Eleanor had poured every penny, every ounce of her strength, into their futures, and they'd thrived, hadn't they? Or so she'd thought. She glanced at the framed photo on the sideboard, the 4 of them at Lila's college graduation, laughing under a spring sky. That was before Tom re-entered their lives 10 years ago, remarried to a woman named Cassandra Younger. Glamorous and impossibly magnetic. Cassandra had swept in with her lavish parties and designer gifts. And slowly, Eleanor's children had drifted toward her orbit. At first, it was small things, missed Sunday dinners, forgotten Mother's Day calls. But tonight, her 70th birthday, was different. Tonight was a wound. Her phone buzzed, and her heart leapt. Maybe it was Sophie, her sweet girl, with an explanation. But the screen showed a text from her neighbor. Margaret, saw your kids' cars at Cassandra's place. Big party tonight. You okay? Eleanor's hand trembled as she set the phone down. Cassandra's party. Of course. The woman who'd never changed a diaper or paid a tuition bill had thrown a gala, and her children had chosen it over her. She stood, her knees aching from years of standing too long, and walked to the window. The street outside was dark, save for the glow of street lights. She imagined her children at Cassandra's mansion, clinking champagne glasses, laughing under fairy lights. Did they even remember her birthday? Did they care? The thought twisted like a knife. She'd given them everything: her youth, her savings, her heart, and they'd traded her for sparkle. Eleanor returned to the table and blew out the candles, the smoke curling like a sigh. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough when Tom left, when the bills piled up, when the kids started calling Cassandra Mom. Instead, she felt something new, a quiet, steely resolve. She wasn't invisible. Not yet. She pulled a notepad from the drawer and began to write. Not a letter to her children. Not yet. This was for her lawyer. The inheritance, her savings. The house. The stocks she'd carefully built over decades was meant for them. But if they couldn't spare a night for her, maybe they didn't deserve it. Her pen moved faster, the words spilling out. She wasn't sure what she'd do, but the act of writing felt like reclaiming something. Herself. Perhaps. By midnight, the cake was still untouched, the tarts wrapped in foil. Eleanor sat back, her notes scattered across the table. She thought of her mother, who'd taught her to stand tall even when the world tried to shrink her. "You're enough, Ellie," she'd said. For the first time in years, Eleanor believed it. The morning after her birthday, Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom curtains. She lay still, listening to the quiet of her house. No laughter, no clatter of breakfast dishes, no voices calling Mom. From the kitchen, the silence was heavier than she'd expected, but it didn't break her. She rose, dressed in her favorite navy sweater, and brewed coffee strong enough to jolt her senses. Today, she'd face the truth. She drove to her lawyer's office, a small brick building downtown where Mr. Haroldson, a kind man with wire-rimmed glasses, had handled her affairs for years. The notes she'd written last night were tucked in her purse, their edges worn from her restless fingers. She hadn't slept much, her mind replaying decades of sacrifices, the nights she'd stayed up sewing Lila's costumes, the weekends she'd driven Mark to science fairs, the guitar lessons she'd paid for Sophie with overtime checks. Had it all been for nothing? Mr. Haroldson greeted her warmly, but his smile faded when he saw her expression. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" he asked, gesturing to a chair. She sat, her hands clasped tightly, and told him everything. The empty table, the text from Margaret, the sting of her children's absence. She slid the notes across his desk. "I want to change my will," she said, her voice steady. "They don't get to walk away and still claim what I built." Haroldson leaned back, his brow furrowed. "This is a big decision. Eleanor, are you sure?" She nodded, though her heart ached. She wasn't punishing them, she was protecting herself. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was her life's work, her love made tangible. If they didn't value her, why should they value what she'd earned? He promised to draft the changes, suggesting she redirect the funds to a cause she cared about. "Maybe a charity," he said. "Something that means something to you." Eleanor thought of the community center where she'd volunteered for years, teaching literacy to kids who reminded her of her own children long ago. The idea sparked something in her, a flicker of purpose. When she left the office, she didn't go home. Instead, she drove to the community center, a squat building with peeling paint and a basketball court out back. Inside, children laughed as they colored at tables, their voices filling the air with life. Eleanor smiled, her first real smile in days. She found Mrs. Carter, the director, and asked how she could help more. "We could use a reading program for the older kids," Mrs. Carter said. "Something to keep them out of trouble." Eleanor nodded, her mind already turning. She had money, time, and a heart full of stories. Maybe this was where she belonged. That evening, she called each of her children. No one answered. She left voicemails, her tone calm but firm. "I missed you at my birthday. I hope you're well. We need to talk soon." She didn't mention the will. That would come later. For now, she needed to know if they'd even notice her absence. Days passed, and only Sophie called back. Her voice rushed. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Cassandra's party was a last-minute thing. I didn't think," Eleanor cut her off gently. "You chose. Sophie. I understand." The words hurt, but they were true. Sophie promised to visit soon, but Eleanor heard the hollowness in her voice. Her daughter was already slipping away again. Eleanor spent her evenings at the community center, reading to teenagers who listened with wide eyes. Their gratitude filled a void she hadn't realized was so deep. She began to see her worth not in her children's choices, but in the impact she could still make. 2 weeks later, Eleanor invited her children to dinner. She didn't call it a birthday redo, just a family meal. She cooked their favorites: roast chicken for Lila, mashed potatoes for Mark, and chocolate mousse for Sophie. The table was set simply. No candles this time, just the hope that they'd show up. She wore her best dress, a deep green that made her feel strong, and waited. Lila arrived first, her paint-splattered jeans a reminder of her artist's life. Mark came next, his doctor's coat swapped for a sweater, his face tired but polite. Sophie was last, her guitar case slung over her shoulder, her smile hesitant. They hugged Eleanor, but the embraces felt perfunctory, like checking a ox. She didn't let it show, serving dinner with a warmth she didn't fully feel. The conversation started light work, weather, small talk. But as they ate, Eleanor's resolve hardened. She set down her fork and looked at each of them. "Why didn't you come to my birthday?" she asked, her voice quiet but piercing. The room stilled. Lila fidgeted. Mark stared at his plate, and Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, it was just bad timing," Mark said finally. "Cassandra's party was for her charity. We thought you'd understand." Lila nodded. "Yeah, it was a big deal. We didn't mean to hurt you." Sophie said nothing, her silence louder than words. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. "You thought I'd understand being forgotten on my 70th birthday. After everything I've done for you." Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with the weight of years. She told them about the cake, the tarts, the empty chairs. She told them how it felt to learn they were at Cassandra's, celebrating a woman who'd never sacrificed for them. Mark tried to explain. "Cassandra's been good to us, Mom. She's family too." The words cut deeper than Eleanor expected. "She's not your mother," she said softly. "I am." Lila reached for her hand, but Eleanor pulled back. "I've given you everything, but I'm not invisible. Not anymore." She told them about the will, not the details, just enough to make them listen. "I'm redirecting the inheritance," she said, "to people who value what I've built." Their faces paled. Sophie whispered, "Mom, you can't mean that." But Eleanor stood firm. "I do. You made a choice. So have I." The dinner ended in silence. They left, promising to call, to visit, to fix things. But as Eleanor cleared the table, she felt a strange relief. She'd spoken her truth, and it had set something free inside her. She didn't need their approval to know her worth. The next day, she returned to the community center, where the kids greeted her with hugs. She'd started a reading club, and the teenagers were already asking for more books. "Mrs. Carter pulled her aside. "You're changing lives, Eleanor. These kids talk about you like you're their hero." Eleanor's eyes stung, but she smiled. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Eleanor threw herself into the community center, her days filled with purpose. She used her savings to fund the reading program, buying books and tablets for the kids. She taught them stories of resilience her own, though she never said it outright. The teenagers, tough as they tried to seem, hung on her every word, their eyes bright with dreams she recognized from her children's younger days. At home, her phone stayed quiet. Lila sent a text, promising to visit, but never did. Mark called once, his voice clipped, asking about the will. Is this really what you want, Mom? He asked. Eleanor didn't waver. It's what I need, she said. Sophie was the only one who showed up. One rainy afternoon, her guitar case dripping on the porch. They talked for hours. Not about the will, but about life. Sophie's music. Eleanor's volunteering. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Eleanor met with Mr. Haroldson again, finalizing the changes. Most of her estate would go to the community center, with a trust for the reading program. A smaller portion was set aside for her children, enough to show she still loved them, but not enough to let them take her for granted. You're sure? Haroldson asked again. She nodded. I'm building something new. One evening, as she read to the kids, a girl named Maya lingered after the group dispersed. Miss Eleanor, why do you do this? She asked. You could be relaxing, not working so hard. Eleanor smiled, her heart full. Because you're worth it, she said. Maya hugged her, and Eleanor felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. Cassandra's parties continued. Her children occasionally swept up in them. But Eleanor didn't let it sting anymore. She had her own light now, one that didn't depend on their choices. She started writing her memoir, not for publication, but for herself, a record of a woman who'd loved fiercely, lost deeply, and found herself again. Months passed, and Eleanor's life found a new rhythm. The community center became her second home, the kids her extended family. She celebrated small victories, Maya's first poem, a boy named Jamal reading his first novel. Her children remained distant, but Sophie visited more, her apologies slowly turning into real conversations. Eleanor cherished these moments, though trust was slow to rebuild. Then came the letter from Cassandra. It arrived in a cream envelope, her name scrawled in elegant cursive. Inside was an invitation to a family reconciliation dinner at her mansion. Eleanor's first instinct was to toss it, but something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe defiance. She RSVP'd yes, choosing a simple black dress that felt like armor. The night of the dinner, Eleanor drove to Cassandra's sprawling estate. The house glittered with lights, music spilling from open windows. Inside, her children waited, along with Cassandra, who greeted her with a smile too perfect to trust. Eleanor, I'm so glad you came, she said, her voice dripping with charm. Eleanor nodded, her eyes on her children. The dinner was tense, the air thick with unspoken words. Cassandra spoke of unity, of blending their families. But Eleanor saw through Ida performance, not a promise. When Lila mentioned the will, her voice sharp, Eleanor didn't flinch. I've made my choice, she said. It's not about punishment. It's about respect. Mark argued. Sophie pleaded. But Eleanor held her ground. You have your lives, she said. I'm building mine. As she left, she felt lighter, unburdened by their expectations. She drove home under a starlit sky, her heart steady. A year later, Eleanor stood in the community center, now renovated with her donations. The reading room bore her name, a surprise from the kids who'd insisted on honoring her. She looked at the plaque, Eleanor Grayson Reading Haven, and felt a pride that no party could match. Her children had begun to come around. Slowly, Sophie moved closer, joining the reading club as a volunteer. Lila sent a painting, a portrait of Eleanor with the kids at the center. Mark visited, his apologies quiet but sincere. They were trying, and Eleanor let them. But she no longer waited for their validation. On her 71st birthday, she didn't plan a big dinner. Instead, she invited the community center kids to her house. They ate cake, laughed, and read stories under the stars. Sophie was there, strumming her guitar, her smile genuine. Lila and Mark called, promising to visit soon. Eleanor believed them, but it didn't matter as much anymore. She'd redirected her inheritance, not just the money, but her love, her time, her legacy, to the kids who needed her, to the woman she'd become. As she blew out her candles, surrounded by new faces and old dreams, Eleanor knew she was enough.